Even better? Is that good? So it is. People are still arriving, and there are a few areas, maybe over here probably, for you to find a spot. Sure. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today. I'm Martha Johnson, Director of the Mayor Museum of Art at Randolph College. And I get to introduce our speaker, Randolph College Art History Professor and Curator of Venetian Visions, Dr. Andrea Campbell. Before I do that, I'd like to thank Randolph College President Bradley Bateman for dreaming big with Sir Nicholas Penny, outgoing director of the National Gallery in London, and Dean of the College, Carl Girelli, who is also fearlessly exploring the possibilities of our partnership with the gallery. The Mayer Museum of Art staff has worked for many months preparing for this. Debbie Spanich, our registrar, Danny Schreffler, our office manager and public engagement coordinator, John Spanich, museum guard and preparator, and Ann McDaniel, our invigilator. If you don't know what one is, just ask her. But ask her nicely. Finally, great but quiet gratitude is directed to the anonymous donor who is entirely underwriting Venetian Visions. As a partnership between the National Gallery and Randolph College began to take shape, one facet that emerged was the potential for artwork loans. As that idea began to look possible, we were in the glorious position of contemplating just what works we might ask to borrow. The National Gallery has some pretty nice things. And we do too, but what we have is American. Dr. Campbell's specialty is Italian painting, sculpture, and architecture between 1250 and 1600. So it only made sense that in this inaugural exhibition that we play to our strengths. Dr. Campbell's areas of expertise are not represented in our collection. Venetian Visions is providing a way for her to finally teach using primary sources. And what gorgeous primary sources they are. We all understand and repeat often that using slides and books to teach art are inferior to being in front of the real thing. But it truly is only when you are actually in that space, in front of the work, that you realize the gulf between the reproduction and the real thing. Dr. Campbell has taught at the college since 2004. She is a highly regarded scholar in the field of Renaissance art. She earned her master's and PhD at Rutgers, and her dissertation was on the social and artistic context of the baptistry of Siena. She has since published extensively on Sienese art and civic life, and last summer attended a convention in Siena at which she presented her work, A Franciscan for the 15th Century, San Bernardino and His Message of Peace. Dr. Campbell is also a meticulous curator. And when I say curator, I mean, she didn't just choose these paintings and say, okay, go on, do it. She chose the theme, she chose the paintings, she wrote the exhibition catalog, she wrote the exhibition labels, she was involved in every single decision that you see. There were other hands that assisted in those decisions, but all the decisions were hers. And she's created an exhibition that is scholarly and engaging. Her premise was so compelling, in fact, that the courier who accompanied the Vivarini painting from Yale had said that the head curator there is typically reluctant to loan European works, but was so impressed by Andrea's concept that he felt especially motivated to approve the loan. It's in fact the first time it has ever traveled. It's been a pleasure to work with her on this project. and I am pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Martha, for such a gracious introduction. It is such a great pleasure to welcome you to the Venetian Visions exhibition. And I'm glad to have the chance to give you some background on Venetian painting and culture that I hope will enhance your experience with the 4 paintings that we have online. I would like to begin with a brief introduction to the history of Venice and give you a sense of its socio-political character. Many of the Italian city-states of the Renaissance have vivid foundation stories, and Venice is no exception. These narratives that account for how cities were founded are generally based in part on fact and partly on fiction, but entirely on belief. They were created not to describe fantasies about the city's past, but portray instead the temporary identity of the city and the ideal its citizens sought as they moved into their futures. Venice takes its name from a Roman province called Venetia, which derives from veni etiam, or come again, which is quite fitting because one visit to Venice is never enough. Despite having a Roman name, during the Roman period, the islands were only minimally inhabited by small groups who sustained themselves by harvesting fish and salt from the sea. It was not easy to live or build on these islands in the Adriatic Lagoon, and people settled here in significant numbers because they sought refuge. Invasions of Goths, Huns, and Lombards coming from the north during the 5th and 6th centuries prompted people to leave the fertile plains of Lombardy and establish settlements on the islands. Following the collapse of the Roman Empire, the province of Venetia became part of the Byzantine Empire and was ruled from Constantinople by the year 539. What is most persuasive about Venice's identity is the story that was created by her people. If we look at the view towards the Piazzetta, in front of the Venetian seat of government, we see 2 columns. These frame the ceremonial entrance to the city and feature Venice's 2 patron saints, St. Theodore and the lion symbol for St. Mark. St. Theodore, a warrior saint, was appropriate for Venice when the city was an outpost of the Byzantine Empire. But by the 9th century, Venetians wanted to declare their independence from the Eastern Empire, and they began to refashion their city as a holy city of the Christian West. The Venetians claimed a new patron for themselves and selected St. Mark, the author of the 2nd Gospel. Actually, the Venetians did not choose Mark, but God had selected Mark for Venice, as revealed by a prophecy. While St. Mark was en route from Aquileia to Rome, his ship put in at the islands of Venice. An angel appeared to him and said, "Peace be unto you, Mark, my evangelist. On this spot shall your body rest." And you can see the first part of the angel's greeting here described in the book. St. Mark eventually went on to Alexandria, where he established the church and was later martyred and buried. Then, in 828, 2 Venetian merchants persuaded their Christian brethren in Alexandria to help them take the relics of St. Mark to Italy, where they would be at a safe distance from the Muslims who now ruled Alexandria. The merchants took the relics of St. Mark and placed them in a large basket and carried that to the waiting ship. The only problem was that when they returned to Venice, they hid the remains of St. Mark so well that no one could find them for about 2 centuries. When the relics made their whereabouts known in the burial vault of the church, it was declared a miraculous demonstration of St. Mark's desire to be in Venice. And that's what you see here, the discovery. The Venetians built a magnificent church to enshrine his relics and dedicated the church to St. Mark. The Church of San Marco we see today is the 11th century successor to the original church, which had to be rebuilt after a fire. The Greek cross plan of the Church of San Marco, and in particular its 5 distinctive domes, emulate the Church of the Holy Apostles in Jerusalem, an association that underscores not only the sacredness of the relics of Mark, but the piety of Venice as well. The church was built as the chapel of the Doge, the political head of Venice, and is not a cathedral administered by a bishop of Rome. As such, San Marco serves the Venetian state. And you can see its placement here immediately next to the Ducal Palace, where the Doge lives and the government meets. Venice is known as La Serenissima, the most serene republic, because of its military strength that was tempered by prudence and justice. Peace and prosperity for Venetians were the goals of this concept, and they were achieved because La Serenissima endured for 11 centuries, from the election of the first Doge in 697 to the Republic's fall under Napoleon in 1797. The Republic was indeed a representative form of government, but it was an oligarchy, as only men from noble families could serve on the Great Council, the legislative and principal body of the Venetian government. In 1297, the Great Council passed a law called La Salata, or closure. They literally made a list of the families whose male members could serve on the Great Council, circumscribing forever the hereditary privilege of serving in the legislature. Members of the cittadini, bourgeoisie, could take salary positions in the bureaucracy, where they provided a stable base for the patricians who rotated through the elected offices of the government. The patricians elected the Doge from among their class, and this is a portrait of one of the Doges here, kneeling, holding a banner. The Doge, or Duke of Venice, was the head of state and was elected for life. His power was limited, but his position was nevertheless extremely important, as it embodied the Republic's relationship with St. Mark. The investiture ceremony of the Doge reached its climax at the high altar of San Marco. Here, the Doge received the banner of St. Mark, which symbolized the eternal authority of the Doge that was bestowed by St. Mark. After his investiture, the Doge never left the ducal palace unless he was wearing the ducal costume, as he had become the temporal embodiment of the spiritual authority of the Republic. The Republic of Venice fashioned itself as a holy city. With the relics of the Apostle St. Mark, Venice rivaled even Rome with its relics of St. Peter. In addition to taking an apostle for their patron saint, Venetians claimed that their city was founded on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, in the year 421. The Annunciation refers to the angel Gabriel's announcement to Mary that she will bear the Son of God, and it was also the moment of the Incarnation, when Mary miraculously became pregnant with Jesus. By claiming that their city was conceived on the same day as Christ, Venetians demonstrated their belief in the piety of their city and its special protection under the Virgin Mary. Therefore, while imagery of the Virgin Mary and her son Jesus were extremely popular throughout Renaissance Italy, it was particularly meaningful for Venetians. One of the paintings we have borrowed for the exhibition is this Virgin and Child enthroned by Antonio Vivarini. The painting was given to Yale by Hannah and Louis Rabinowitz in 1959, and as Martha said, this is the first time the painting has left the Yale Gallery. Its earliest traceable location is a collection in Rome from where it was sold in 1907. In the absence of more surviving documentation, we are left with the evidence of the painting itself and the rest of the artist's works to arrive at an understanding of what the painting originally looked like and how it might have been used. The panel has been chopped down at the top and probably along the sides, and is no longer in its original frame. It has been assumed that this was the central panel of a polyptych, a multi-paneled altarpiece. When you get up close to the painting in the gallery, you can see in the gold background evidence of the Gothic arch that originally framed the top of the painting. So can see kind of arching lines here and here. An altar piece, the Virgin Mary sits on a marble throne that has been draped with a cloth of honor, a regal symbol. In this case, the cloth of honor is the same color as the throne itself, which is somewhat unusual. You'll have to look closely when you're in the gallery, and you will see the fold lines of the cloth and the pattern of the material. So see, that's a fold line, and here's a fold line. The gold background and music-making angels situate the Madonna and Child in heaven, and despite the formality of the throne, the child reaches up to his mother with a natural gesture instead of turning to bless the viewer. An altarpiece is a painting or sculpted relief that is placed on top of an altar. Our painting, borrowed from Yale, may have originally been the center panel of something that looked like the St. Mark triptych by Bartolomeo di Bellini, Antonio's brother. In the medieval period, altars had decorative panels placed on front of the altar below the horizontal surface. And you see an example of that here. In the next phase of development, relatively small panels were placed on top of the altar and at the back of the surface. And you can see that in this manuscript illumination. In the 13th century, these panels grew to be quite large, as you can see from these two paintings that are presently installed in the Uffizi Museum. The development of the altarpiece has been related to the liturgy of the Mass, that is, prayers and rituals that comprised the religious service. The focal point of the Mass was the symbolic reenactment of Christ's death, which made salvation possible. Bread and wine, called the Eucharist, were consecrated during the Mass and believed to become the body and blood of Christ. These were offered to the congregation following Christ's example and directive at the Last Supper. The Ecumenical Church Council, held in 1215, explained this doctrine of transubstantiation, when the consecrated bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ, and stated that all Christians should receive the Eucharist at least once a year, at Easter. The coincidence of the new emphasis on the Eucharist with the horizontal development of altar furnishings has given rise to the theory that altarpieces developed in response to the Eucharist. The painting on the right shows a priest standing in front of an altar and allows us to visualize how an image of the Virgin and Child in heaven would be an appropriate backdrop to the ritual sacrifice that was central to Christian salvation. While altars are used to recreate Christ's sacrifice, the central panel of Italian Renaissance altarpieces generally don't feature the crucifixion or events leading up to Christ's death. Rather, they usually represent saints or a vision of heaven, as we see in our Antonio di Bellini panel from Yale. The Madonna and Child enthroned was likely the central panel of a polyptych, a multi-paneled altarpiece like the St. Teresia's altar that you see here on the right. It may have had two stories, like the St. Teresia's altarpiece, and it would have been in a similar style frame. Such large and elaborate frames were often destroyed when altarpieces were dismantled and collected. This is one such altarpiece that no longer has its frame. The Yale panel may have come from an altarpiece like this one, which is just a single row of standing saints. This painting on the right is by Bartolomeo di Bellini, Antonio's younger brother. There was a strong tradition for family workshops in Venice, and the Di Bellini family contributed some of the most important artists of the second half of the 15th century in Venice. Antonio and Bartolomeo sometimes collaborated on a single work, such as these very large polyptychs. But each was also an independent painter, despite sharing a workshop, and would take commissions as individuals. When artists work together on a single painting, they generally try to make their styles uniform, so the completed work has a stylistic coherence. Sometimes artists who work together emulate the motifs and conventions used by the other, even when they work independently. This can make it difficult to distinguish the hand of the artist, that is to say, to be able to recognize which artist painted the work. Such is the case with the Yale painting, which was attributed to Bartolomeo Vivarini since it was first published in 1909 up until the year 2012. You can see in this comparison between the two works that Antonio and Bartolomeo both have a sculptural approach to form. The figures are modeled to look three-dimensional with shading in light and dark. But the Yale artist's modeling of the human figures is much softer than what we see in Bartolomeo's Monocini triptych, suggesting that the artist was Antonio Vivarini and not his brother. Moreover, in more securely documented works, Antonio tends to place the Christ child standing on his mother's lap, while Bartolomeo often depicts the child sleeping. So for stylistic reasons, and because of the treatment of the subject, the attribution of the Yale painting was changed to Antonio Vivarini only 3 years ago. Antonio's son, Alvise, was a little older than our painter, Cima, and Alvise had some influence on Cima during his early years. So the two Madonna and Child paintings in our exhibition demonstrate the changes that occurred from one generation to the next. These altarpieces emphasize the role of the Virgin Mary in human salvation, as she is shown as the mother of Christ. Mary was also believed to be an intercessor for humanity, and as we have noted, she was a special patron of Venice. Icons of the Virgin Mary, such as the Madonna Nicopeia, were imported from Byzantium and collected all over Italy. As a seaport and former province of Byzantium, Venice acquired a lot of Byzantine art, and Venetian artists emulated the Byzantine style longer than artists in other Italian cities. The Madonna Nicopeia, this icon here on your right, was believed to work miracles, and the painting was taken out of the church of San Marco and carried in procession throughout the city when Venetians sought the Virgin's help, whether in battle or in overcoming the plague. Similarly, the Madonna's protection was desired for Renaissance homes, and most households had at least one image of the Madonna and Child. You can see in these paintings by Vittore Carpaccio a Madonna and Child displayed in bedrooms. In the scene on the left, St. Ursula is explaining to her father, the King of Brittany, the conditions by which she will accept the marriage he has arranged for her. And you can see just above their heads this Madonna and Child. In the scene on the right, Ursula is sleeping, and an angel comes and forewarns her of her martyrdom. And there's a painting displayed in her bedroom right here next to the bed. While these are imaginary rooms, we do know from household inventories that most homes in Renaissance Venice had a Madonna and Child in the bedchamber. The Renaissance bedchamber, unlike the modern master bedroom, was a space used during the day by the family and was also where guests were received. So the family would have spent much of their day in this space under the watchful eyes of the Madonna. Many of these inventories record the presence of paintings of Our Lady in the Greek style, as late even as the 16th century and probably later. So the painting here, The Arrival of the Ambassadors, is in the Greek style with its gold background. Icons of the Virgin Mary were believed to represent her likeness, according to a tradition that St. Luke painted the Virgin Mary from life. This is why the Byzantine tradition for paintings of the Madonna was conservative. Greek artists did not want to change what they thought was a portrait of the Virgin Mary, nor did artists in Western Christendom in Italy. In time, however, artists began to recreate representations of the Virgin and Child that more closely imitated nature instead of icons. Contemporary with the Vivarini family of painters was the Bellini family, headed by Jacopo Bellini. Jacopo and his sons transformed painting in Venice even more than the Vivarini by assimilating elements of the new Renaissance style that had been formed in Florence. In Jacopo Bellini's Madonna of the Cherubim, you can see how Jacopo modifies the Byzantine icon format. Rather than having the Madonna and Child cut off by the bottom of the frame, he places the Madonna behind a lone wall. You can see she's standing behind it, offering a rational reason for us to see only her upper half. Jacopo uses a significant amount of gold, but he uses it to describe form. Gold stippling on the Virgin's robe creates natural-looking highlights and gives the figure volume. The background is not solid gold, but is full of seraphim, also described with gold stippling. The meaning of the gold as an indicator of the sacred or divine has been retained, and the artist still brings the Madonna and Child close to the viewer, but all this is achieved with more naturalistic effect than its icon model. It was Jacopo's son, Giovanni Bellini, who more or less invented the half-length Madonna in Venice. In the Davis Madonna that you see here on the right, this is his first painting of the Queen. He has absorbed his father's lessons, but has changed the characterization of both the mother and child by replacing the courtly, elegant style of his father with an austere realism. The stylistic austerity of the Virgin and the representation of the child as an infant Hercules type makes them more human, while at the same time imbuing the figures with virtue and dignity. The gold references to divinity are gone, and the Madonna's supernatural status is suggested by her monumentality against the landscape background. She is both of this world as a human being, but at the same time is beyond our world, having been born without the stain of original sin. Christ is still shown as a baby, but his adult sacrifice is foreshadowed by his sleeping position, which evokes death. His nudity demonstrates his likeness to all male infants and underscores his humanity, the miracle of God made man, who, by becoming human, would redeem humanity. While this image was not placed above a church altar, the marble on which Christ sleeps evokes the altar table at which the Eucharist recalls the bodily sacrifice of Christ during the Mass. A recent monograph on Giovanni Bellini lists 107 works in his oeuvre, over 1/3 of which are half-length Madonnas. If we include those Madonnas that are attributed to his workshop, then over half of his activity was aimed at the consumer of private devotional aids. Giovanni's Madonna and Child paintings were described in a 17th century biography as very beautiful and devout. The term devout suggests that the painting's formal qualities matched their function, and this is borne out by the success of his Madonna paintings in the market. Like Bellini, Cima da Conegliano, who you see illustrated on the right, made many Madonna and Child paintings for private devotion, and he was greatly influenced by Bellini when he arrived in Venice as a young painter, and Giovanni Bellini was already in the 4th decade of his career. The Madonna by Cima is a tour de force of painting. It shows the Madonna and Child monumentalized against a landscape background as Bellini did, but Cima's figures are more natural. The Virgin and Child interact as any mother and child might, with the child shown in a difficult twisting pose, as though he can't decide whether he wants to leave the security of his mother's lap. The naturalness of their interaction makes us more aware of their surpassing beauty, and the spectacular colors of their clothes let us know that they are not an ordinary mother and child. Both of these paintings are in the collection of the National Gallery, London, and it was difficult to choose which one to request for the exhibition. I chose the later Madonna and Child, which is on your right, as I find it more psychologically compelling. The Madonna is seated behind a wall, which both separates us from her and yet places her almost within our reach. Rather than looking up to a monumentalized Virgin, the viewing point in the later Madonna allows us to look directly at her, and she looks out in our direction as well, involving us in the painting in a way that the earlier picture does not. So, too, the child in the later painting sees someone or something in the viewer's space, which also breaks down the barrier between the painted figure and the viewer. The pose of the child is even more accomplished than in the earlier version, and this time it appears as though he has decided he's ready to clamber off his mother's lap, which is perhaps the reason for her somber expression. It was believed that Mary had foreknowledge of her son's future martyrdom. The landscape in the later Madonna and Child has changed. Many of Cima's works feature landscapes, and he often depicted views of his hometown, Conegliano, in his painting's backgrounds. But while this landscape has discernible elements, it is hazier and seems less specific. To the right, we see deer grazing, and behind them, a river draws your eye into the background, showing the reflection of a bridge. On the left, a man in red and white hose walks in our direction. Who is he, and what relationship does he have with the Virgin and Child? Neither the man, nor the deer, nor the beautiful landscape features have anything properly to do with the subject of the Madonna and Child, but they do relate to a new development in Venetian painting, the pastoral. The pastoral refers to a genre of art and literature that celebrates nature and idealizes the role of humanity therein. The pastoral tradition began with ancient Greek poets, including Theocritus, who wrote the Idyls, short poems that celebrate rural life and are called bucolic or pastoral, as they feature shepherds or herdsmen. The shepherds of the Idyls are not as concerned with tending their flocks as they are with their conversations about love. Their landscape setting is real, but is also mythical, as nymphs and deities appear and play roles in the stories. Inspired by Theocritus, the Roman poet Virgil wrote the Eclogues, a copy of which is included in the exhibition, and this is the painted frontispiece to the Eclogues. Virgil located his poem in Arcadia, the mythic mountainous home of Pan, the Greek god of shepherds and flocks, but also of untamed nature and rustic music, and he was companion as well to the nymphs. Arcadia thus became an idyllic place where humanity could be in harmony with nature and where love and poetry could flourish. The homage to a poet painting included in our exhibition belongs to this pastoral tradition. The painting is given to a follower of Giorgione, because while we don't know who the artist was, in this painting he was working in this style and with a kind of subject matter that had been developed by Giorgione. Giorgione and Titian were two of the most influential painters in Venice in the generation after Giovanni Bellini and Cima da Conegliano. They both further explored the late style of Giovanni Bellini and developed a very painterly, loose style, creating forms out of color and light, and enveloping them in atmosphere. This style became the hallmark of Venetian painting and inspired later artists such as Rubens and Velázquez. They also developed the genre of pastoral painting, and both of these contributions are among the most important legacies of Renaissance artists. Before the development of the pastoral, stories of all kinds, whether mythological, biblical, or apocryphal, were in demand by Renaissance patrons, and Renaissance artists were asked to depict subjects from these sources. Titian's Bacchus and Ariadne that you see on your left relates the story of the mythological couple, but Titian does more than merely illustrate his literary sources. Titian demonstrates the superiority of painting over poetry by showing multiple moments of the narrative all at once. Ariadne reaches out toward her fleeing lover, and you can see his ship just on the edge of the horizon. But in the same moment, turns to see Bacchus, who will be her next lover. And we are reassured of their love story because of the corona of stars over Ariadne's head, her transformation caused by loving the divine Bacchus. Titian described some of his works as poesie and considered them to be the visual equivalents of poetry. He and Giorgione created new subjects for paintings that were not drawn from literary sources, but evoked themes such as lovers or poets in pastoral landscapes. In the Fête Champêtre that you see here on the right, two nude women are apparently unnoticed by the male musicians, but they are the muses of poetry and music. The artist has not drawn this subject from a specific literary source, and in their rivalry with the writers, the painters have become the poets as well. Similarly, no specific literary source has been identified for homage to a poet that we have in the exhibition. And its subject is puzzling. A poet, identifiable by his crown of laurel, sits on a raised throne under a canopy. Right here. He's accompanied by a musician and approached by two figures who wish to honor him. The figures have left the city as we see architecture in the background and have chosen their setting, a special landscape in which we find wild animals living in harmony and a hermit in a cave up here. The artist has created an Arcadia, the home of poetry, enlightenment, and an idyllic existence. The idea that a sylvan setting may host visits from nymphs, or may recall a golden age, is a theme that has inspired artists for centuries. On your way out of the exhibition, you will see Nixie, painted by Arthur B. Davies in 1898. Davies painted a nude, youthful woman rising from a seated position next to a pool of water in a wooded setting. He eventually found a title for the painting, naming it Nixie for the water sprite of Germanic folklore. But the idea of the nymph transcends a particular identification, and what Davies sought was the recreation of an ideal past. The works of Botticelli offered him a graceful vision of antiquity, and he studied Giorgione and Titian very closely as well. Davies painted Nixie with Venetian-style modeling and used glazes and varnishes on this painting, perhaps intending to enhance the pastoral meaning by making it resemble his Venetian models. Out in the galleries where the permanent collection is displayed, you will see Thomas Cole's Corway Peak. In this work, Cole recreates a view of Corway Peak and presents it as it was before its natural beauty was spoiled by man-made structures and roads. It is an imagined scene of a real location returned to its pristine state, an American garden. The pastoral tradition is one of the greatest legacies of Venetian artists, and I hope you will find new layers of meaning and subtlety in the landscapes and allegorical paintings that you encounter. I hope, too, that your experience with China's David and Jonathan will stay with you and give you new perspective as you encounter works of art, literature, or music featuring the life of David. The David and Jonathan that we have in the exhibition, which you see here on the left, is an unusual painting, as it does not appear to have a precedent in Italian art. There are many Italian works of art that feature David, and Michelangelo's colossal sculpture is perhaps one of the most widely recognized works of art in the world. David is a prophet of the Old Testament who was revered as a saint by medieval and early modern Christians. He was the youngest son of Jesse and tended his father's flocks, yet he ultimately became the second king of Israel. He played the harp and, according to tradition, composed the Psalms, a collection of prayers that are typically sung. His musical talent is what brought him to the court of Saul, king of the Israelites, whose troubled spirit was soothed by David's music. David was sent to the battlefield to bring provisions to his brothers who were among the Israelites fighting the Philistines. This is the setting for the best-known event of David's life, his battle against the giant Goliath. Goliath challenged Israel's army to send forth one person to fight against him. Only David stepped forward to do so and reassured Saul that the Lord would protect him. Saul offered armor and a sword, but being unaccustomed to the weight of the gear, David declined them and selected stones for his slingshot instead. He struck the giant with a stone, and having felled him, rushed forward and used Goliath's own sword to decapitate him. So these works of art depict different moments in the battle. The manuscript illumination shows 3 moments. Here's David with the slingshot. Here he has already struck Goliath in the head with a stone, and here he is about to decapitate him. And this is Donatello's David, where you see the young shepherd standing on the severed head of the giant. And Michelangelo shows David in the moment before the battle, with his brow knit in concentration, and he's holding the slingshot here. These representations of David were used in political contexts. The manuscript illumination was made for the King of France, and the selection of episodes from the life of David was made accordingly. The scene in the top register shows Samuel anointing David, demonstrating that he was God's choice as the next ruler of Israel. French kings were also anointed in a ritual that confirmed the sanctity of the king. Donatello's David in the middle bore an inscription that read, "The victor is whoever defends the fatherland. All-powerful God crushes the angry enemy. Behold, a boy overcame the great tyrant, conqueror of citizens." David was adopted as a symbol of the city of Florence, a small republic, who believed that their piety would be rewarded by divine aid. Michelangelo's colossal statue was destined for the exterior of Florence Cathedral, but it was decided to place it instead in front of the seat of government. By showing David nude, Michelangelo underscores the universality of David. With no clothing to tie him to an occupation or a specific historic time, he is an everyman and is for everyone. After his victory, David takes the head of Goliath to Saul in Jerusalem, and there meets Jonathan for the first time. So it is clear then that Shema is not telling the story as it occurred in the Bible. So what is his message, and to whom was it directed? It is believed that the painting came from a secular context rather than a church or religious setting. Considering that it may have been in someone's home, my first thought was that this painting was intended to serve as a moral and educational model for male children. It recalled for me the advice of Alberti, who wrote a treatise on the family in 15th century Florence. On the subject of raising boys, Alberti said, "Young men should not be allowed to remain inactive. Let girls sit and grow lazy. Young men should naturally seek exercise. Let them shoot, ride, and pursue other manly and noble sports, like killing giants. They should learn, along with others, to ride, to fence, to swim. All these things are necessary to practical and civic life and are, at the same time, such that little children learn them well and readily without much trouble." Not only do Shema's David and Jonathan exhibit the vigor and valor desired of young men, but we know that works of art in the home provided role models for children. A 15th century treatise on child rearing advises mothers to display images and sculptures around the home. And the treatise says, "Have pictures of saintly children or young virgins in the home, in which your child, still in swaddling clothes, may take delight, and thereby may be gladdened by acts and signs pleasing to childhood. So let let the child see himself mirrored in the Holy Baptist, clothed in camel's skin. A little child who enters the desert, plays with the birds, sucks the honeyed flowers, and sleeps on the ground. It will not be amiss if you should see Jesus and the Baptist, Jesus and the boy evangelist pictured together. It was hoped that the daily actions and the developing personality of the child would reflect the character of the young saints portrayed in painting and sculpture. Moreover, it was believed that a pregnant mother's contemplation of such images could have an impact on the development of her unborn child. It was advised to keep imagery of only beautiful children and adults in the bedrooms of married couples, as these images could influence the appearance of children conceived there. Both Chima's David and Jonathan and his Madonna and Child should be considered with this in mind. I have already noted that Chima is not portraying a moment from the biblical story, but has shown the two heroes walking together in a landscape. Chima's representation seems to highlight their friendship, showing the two walking shoulder to shoulder, with Jonathan gazing intently at David. David and Jonathan shared a profound friendship, and Jonathan protected David when his own father tried to kill him. I mentioned as well that I had found no precedent in Italian art for Chima's representation of David and Jonathan. The closest precursors I have found are French manuscripts that show David and Jonathan as an example of friendship. These images occur in copies of the Somme Le Roi, a 13th century manual of religious instruction. In this manuscript illumination that you see here on your right, you find an image of David and Jonathan embracing as a model of friendship, and unfortunately the title got cut off there, and Saul dropping an arrow on David as a model of hatred. Given that David imagery is often used in political contexts, it may be that Chima's painting was made for an adult patron rather than to be displayed principally for the benefit of children. I am currently investigating the possibility that the painting was made for the two Venetian governors who served as overseers of Padua, an important city under Venetian rule. During the time the painting of David and Jonathan was made, the Venetian territories on the mainland were being attacked by an alliance led by Pope Julius II, and Venice lost control of Padua. The Paduans actually welcomed the alliance forces as they wished to be free of Venetian rule. The Paduan uprising was overturned, and two Venetian governors were sent back to the city to reestablish authority. Surely, these two men would have needed the watchful protection of a loyal friend, and would have hoped for divine aid against much larger enemies. Chima's painting would have provided a model of friendship and offered reassurance as well. But that is a subject for another talk. While it is true that no exhibition takes place without the support of the director, to have a lone exhibition from the National Gallery, London, is one of Johnson. Her vision has achieved an expansion of the partnership between the National Gallery and Randolph College to include you, the entire college community, and all of the mayor's visitors. There simply aren't words to express my gratitude to her vision, her consummate tact and skill in directing the many people and tasks that comprise an exhibition, and her patience and good humor. I would like to thank as well all of the mayor's staff, Debbie and John Spavage, and Danny Schreffler for their hard work in making this exhibition a reality. And I acknowledge with gratitude the support of the top, Kathy Newman and Martha and their efforts. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy these paintings until March 31st.
picture where the baby's holding a bird.
Yes. Yes, so birds, and you heard in that treatise that children, like to play with birds. Birds were kept as pets by children, but the goldfinch became a symbol of the resurrection. And so you often see babies holding a bird as a symbol again of his future sacrifice. This is in fact a linnet, not a goldfinch, but very common. Linnets are common in the Cornelian area. Well, let me know what you think about my idea about the Venetian Visions. I'm going to be working on it, and I appreciate any feedback you have, and I hope you spend lots of time getting exposed to this stuff. Thank you again.